Thank you so much, Diletta. That was so kind of you. And shout out to Sam, wherever she is. Amazing talk, killer outfit. I was talking to my partner last night, who's a professional speaker, and he says the top fears in order are public speaking and death. So shout out to everyone who was speaking today, because if you're at a funeral, most people would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy. So they've done amazingly. And funny, you touched on imposter syndrome as well, which I think everyone in this room can feel. And I think strategically, it's no surprise that they've placed this talk at the end of the day where, you know, you've listened to all these ideas and I'm sure everyone in their mind is like, fuck, do I even know what I'm doing? So this is much more of a balm to soothe everyone's soul at the end of today. So overcoming imposter syndrome, I don't know who's watched the Bean movie, but if you remember Whistler's mother, I love the confidence he had in displaying this picture that he had drawn when he wiped off Whistler mother's face. So what is imposter syndrome? And I'm going to do a little series of our favourite imposters out there. Albert Einstein being the first, where he said, "The exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease, and I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler." So we're in good company. And I just want to do a basic, like, what is imposter syndrome? And I don't think I really need to explain that to anyone. I think everyone in this room is going to know how exactly that feels. But basically, I screenshotted that from Google, and Google seems to think that imposter syndrome is when you just don't have the ability to believe that your success is attributed to your actual work. So yes, everyone here, I'm sure, hands up, has felt it. Whoa, look at that, almost like 100% rate. Maybe some narcissists in here, we're not sure yet. And then I think what's really important is actually the history of imposter syndrome. So 2 scientists, women, in 1978 discovered that there was this shared mindset, basically, of not being good enough. Read it up, the history is really interesting, but the story goes that they were throwing a party for some science students who just wanted to work really hard and didn't want to party. So they pulled up chairs and turned it into a sharing circle, and it turned out everyone had this belief that they didn't deserve to be there. So they coined the term imposter syndrome. But if you fast forward it to 2021 or 2022, what did I write? 2021, in this Harvard Business Review called Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome, definitely read into it, because what they're saying that it is actually a systemic problem. And we'll touch back on that. She called it a white woman problem. Deepest apologies to everyone, but read it up. It's really, really interesting, because when they did the studies on it, they excluded a lot of groups, a lot of minorities. So there's just a whole different conversation opening up on this, and we'll circle back to that. So quick imposter syndrome check. Who is terrified that they made this cartoon about you? You just can't, right? You can't win. You're like, maybe I have imposter syndrome, but maybe I'm just shit. So there's just like no winning. Yeah, I think we are all very quite familiar with that. And then, unfortunately, it's on the rise. And I think LinkedIn has been attributed to making people feel shit about themselves, which makes sense. You know, you always go onto LinkedIn and you're like, wow, everyone's achieving so much. What the fuck am I doing? And Human Resources Discovery, which is a company, they did a research in 2024, and that search for imposter syndrome has gone up by 75%. So that's a bit fucked. There's some more really scurry stats. So as you've seen, there's been a 75% increase in inquiries about imposter syndrome in 2024 alone. Creative arts, here we go, some balm, some soothe for the soul. Creative arts and design had the highest proportion of imposter syndrome, of 87% of people felt that. 90% of female, right? Let that sink in. You're okay. This is normal. 90% of female employees suffer from imposter syndrome, and 48% of the HubSpot 2022 reports respondents admitted to suffering from intrusive thoughts. Who doesn't have intrusive thoughts? I am such good friends with my intrusive thoughts. I've gone to my therapist, and I've genuinely been so afraid that I'm a narcissist. I've taken so many online tests, and she's like, "You're not a narcissist. You wouldn't be asking these questions." And I was like, I've tricked her too. So don't worry, this happens to everyone. Maybe not everyone. And then unfortunately these intrusive thoughts equal physiological responses, you know? And even though these are quite funny, yes, there are some people from my generation, great! It's an Eminem reference for those who don't know. I think someone mentioned 8 Mile in a previous talk, so I'm glad we're all on theme. But some of the not fun parts is that it can lead to depression, anxiety, inaction paralysis, suicidal thoughts. Like it can get really dark. And I've heard some really dark stories about where people go when they feel they don't belong and not good enough and can't take the actions that they need to. So my biggest issue with imposter syndrome is that it puts a lot of the onus on the individuals to resolve. I see you nodding, Rosie. You get it. And Taylor Swift, I'm a big Swiftie. She just gets it as well. I just put her in there because I have to put her in every presentation I do. Just one day, maybe she'll reach out to me. So I have a really unique vantage point because of my 15 years of my career. I think around 12 and a half or 13 years of that is freelancing or working for my own clients. So I've been in a lot of teams, I've been in a lot of environments, a lot of situations. So I want to share with you my unique vantage point of why I think imposter syndrome is a bit of a scam. And to follow our trend, this is the beautiful Maya Angelou, who says that I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find me out now. I've run game on everybody and they're going to find me out. Again, she's a Nobel laureate, guys. Just never gets, it's not going to get better as you get to the top. So I think what part of this is, you know, how we want to be perceived. Like these beautiful glossy pictures of what we look like. I rarely look this serious ever, if you know me. So it was a very odd picture for me. But, you know, the way you can present yourself is you started in digital advertising. I made executive producer at 29. I worked in some big dog agencies. I then transitioned to design, pushed out some amazing design projects. And now here I am speaking at Design Outlook. But I think sometimes what our internal dialogue actually says is that, you know, I got lucky and got this job. I tricked my manager into giving me a promotion. I just bluffed my way into these big agencies. Yes, I transitioned to design, but as a fraud, especially when you're learning like Sketch and Miro and all the things, you're like, fuck, what am I? I don't know how to do this. And also, you know, these design projects were probably shite that I delivered. And here I am at Design Outlook. This is boss-level trickery. So thank you for indulging me. But what I did notice was that I never really felt imposter syndrome until I became perceived as being more successful and as your career begins to climb, and as well as when I started my career in design. So that was a really interesting noticing for me. And, you know, once it hit, it really hit. And all the good things, like you're getting your panic attacks, your procrastination. At one point I had in COVID like a notebook next to my bed in case I dreamt up a solution for a project I was working on, and I did just wake up and write it down because it was all I could think about was that I wasn't good enough, I couldn't figure this out. Anxiety, depression, insomnia, so much fun. Isolating from friends and family, like I can't go out to drinks, I must do this. You know, all of it coming from a place of fear. And my favorite quote was, what if I add no value? And then my friend, who I've worked with for 15 years, is like, yeah, but you say that on every project, so I think you're good. But I really noticed early last year, Roxy, my cat, also gives great presentations. She is an SME in looking her own butt. But I didn't have the imposter syndrome all the time, and it really depended on the environment I was in and who I was working with. I was freelancing at Telstra, I still am, and the people there are just phenomenal. The way they've created these environments where you feel really safe, psychologically safe, they're sharing their experiences, they've got all these, ceremonies in place to help people. I just realized it couldn't thrive there. So yeah, I was trying to think about why that was, and that kind of led me to this research and where I am now. And Adam Grant has a great book called Think Again, so definitely read it if you haven't. He's got some amazing stories about how imposter syndrome shows up in hospitals, how they've diffused it in the Gates Foundation with Melinda Gates reading out mean tweets about her. That seemed to be really effective. But his main important quote was that imposter syndrome isn't a disease, it's a normal response to internalizing impossibly high standards. And that makes so much sense. But if you go onto ChatGPT and you're like, hey, how do I solve it? It's a long list of shit that you need to do as yourself. Like, oh, work on yourself, acknowledge your achievements, take deeper breaths, which I think is a little bit unfair on all the individuals, because there is an element to this. I think it's important to be a master of yourself, but also use that agency to take into consideration what else you could do about your environment. So how do we overcome it? Old mate Tom Hanks, he says, no matter what we've done, there comes a point where you think, how did I get here? When are they going to discover that I am in fact a fraud and they take everything away from me? Again, hopefully a balm for the soul to know that this is not, anything weird, and it is very much shared amongst the great. So I think there's 4 things we can do to overcome imposter syndrome in a creative space. And I have this theory, we'll get into it, but I think find a manager or a leader who farts first. And if you are a manager or a leader, you have to fart first. And third, I think we need to accept and make peace with what that space means of being a creative, and then also just be around people who love you. So the first one, find an environment where leaders fart first. When you start a new relationship and you're both just holding your farts for months, some people do years. You just want to create that space that you're just a perfect human being, and then when someone accidentally farts, where they've laughed too loud or eaten beans, there's just such a sigh of relief. And then you start farting and they're farting and everyone's having such a great time. That's such resonance for a place that you work. So a good leader always farts first on purpose. It really sets the tone, and I've seen this happen in a lot of introverted leadership, especially at Telstra, where they will have leaders who admit to their mistakes or say they don't know, or share their failures and share their difficulties and make it really obvious that it's a safe space to do your own. And some of this can show up like even apologizing for mistakes and making repairs creates this really beautiful dynamic where you then feel you can show up completely as yourself. And the alternative is that everyone just holds in their farts, and that's so bad. Or even worse, if your leader doesn't fart first and you fart first, you will forever just feel embarrassed. So I think this is a really important point that we can all relate to as a very basic human level. And then similarly, if you're a leader, make sure you fart first. Be that person that shows up. Culture, values, psychological safety, they always trickle down from your leadership, and how you act is how your team is going to act. So you can't be saying one thing and asking them to do another. You have to be prepared to show up. And then third, I think it's really important that we make peace with the cost of being in the creative space. It's just extra spicy working in our industry. And I think these will hopefully all resonate with you, where design is there's no one right answer in design, first and foremost. It's not like mathematics where 1 + 1 = 2, although I know there's a whole thing about mathematics. I'm not going to go into it. We'll get out of that. Designs are never finished, and if you're lucky enough, my good friend Lisa gave me this idea as well. If you're a design consultant, you're always looking in. You're never the subject, you're never the SME. You're hired to come in, quickly on board, quickly learn, and then give solutions to people who have been working in this for 10, 20 years. You're just going to feel like an imposter and an outsider. The process of being creative is also very different for everyone. For me, I like to do my talk 4 hours before it's due, because that's just where I find I work best under extreme pressure. I also don't like to prepare, because I like to be surprised by my own slides, because that's where I feel like I can talk really honestly and openly. I don't know how to prepare that any other way. Other friends of mine like to think of ideas in the shower, on the pooper. It's just different for everyone. So as a manager, you can't be like, well, why aren't you doing it this way? I do it this way, or I don't trust you. So it's important to acknowledge that it's different for everyone. And then its very core, design is so subjective. You might think it's beautiful, someone else might think it's hideous. So we're just in this space where it's never going to feel like you're going to know everything or be right. And that's okay. And then fourth, I think being around people who love you. And what the problem is caused by is these performance cultures where you're valued on how much you perform, how much value can you bring, what can you do. But when you're around this, you have to combat this to be around people who love you. So friends, family, pets, Roxy and her butt. People who just adore you as you are, and sometimes regardless of who you are, is a really good antidote to feeling that pressure from your outside context. And so I actually fucked up this, so it's cut off, but I thought it would make it look like, I deliberately made a mistake and farted first on stage. But I didn't, so I'll just be honest. There are some benefits to imposter syndrome as well. Our beautiful Emma Watson, she says, "Now when I receive recognition for my acting, I feel incredibly uncomfortable. I tend to turn it in on myself and I feel like an imposter." And I love Harry Potter. I think she's a queen. So it's just great to see that, again, balm for the soul. There's a bit of a sigh of relief, Everyone's seen the Dunning-Kruger graph. Everyone probably knows it. But the general gist of it is the more dumb you think you are, the more likely you are to be smart. And unfortunately, the more intelligent you think you are. If you walk around thinking you're a genius, you're usually an idiot. So that is unfortunate, but a bit of a balm for the soul. Also, it means you're probably most likely not a narcissist. You're just human. You're in the sweet spot of being a healthy human being, just doing their best, moving from both ends of the spectrum between action paralysis and full-blown narcissism. So it's just a really great healthy indicator that you're human. And then lastly, we'll just leave some final wisdoms from our good mate Sigmund Freud. So before you diagnose yourself with depression or low self-esteem, first make sure that you are in fact not surrounded by assholes. It is very true. Woo! Well, he said it, I didn't, but thank you. But yes, thank you so much for your time. I know it's been a long day and you guys have just showed up so well for all the presenters, because it's nerve-wracking for everyone and I know it's a lot of information to digest too. But yeah, thank you for your time. If you want to have a chat about design or farts or what else did I write? Imposter syndrome, just hit me up or come grab me. And yeah, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your night.